Welcome back to another episode of Focus on EDU, EdTech, and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko from CDW Education. Today we've got Kat Flynn, the Director of Learning Science from Southern New Hampshire University. And this week, the Games for Change Festival was going on. A lot of exciting sessions there. And I'm excited to bring just a sneak peek, a little tidbit of the knowledge and everything that was dropped there this week to our audience here. So, Kat, do us a favor, introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about your work and your background in education.
Happily. Thanks so much for having me on the show, Doug. So the headline of my career so far would be something along the lines of I'm an instructional designer turned learning researcher. As Doug mentioned, my role is Director of Learning Science at Southern New Hampshire University, aka SNU. So from a really early age, I've had this interest in education. I was really inspired by growing up with my older sister. She lived with a severe disability, and this experience of growing up alongside her gave me an appreciation for human differences and specifically how people become to understand these experiences. And it was during college that I connected my budding interest in education to technology. When I was a senior in college, I took this inclusive education course taught by this fabulous professor, the wonderful Dr. Tom Hare. He sadly passed away relatively recently, but this course, is one of those courses that absolutely changed my life. And what changed my life about this course and why it was so important to me in making this bridge between education and technology is that Dr. Hare and his teaching team did something that absolutely turned my head at the time. The inclusive education course very intentionally implemented the three principles of universal design for learning, aka UDL. So some of the things they did, if you're not familiar with UDL, was they offered course resources in multiple formats, for example, video, reading, and podcast, as well as offering different options to submit assignments. Not everything had to be a paper. And I thought, wow, you can do this. You can design a course a bit differently. So absolutely exciting to me. And so from there, it set me on this path toward instructional design in higher education. I liked the graduate course in education so much, I stuck around to earn my master's the next year in mind, brain, and education. And this degree focused on how research from the domains of psychology and neuroscience connect with the world of education and thinking about how that might be best implemented in teaching and learning. And I've been at SNU for about 8 years. It'll be in a month in various instructional design roles, as well as a strategic research role at the university most recently.
Well, that is wonderful. And we're learning, everybody is learning along with us some new acronyms, possibly. I know I just learned SNU right now from you, but have been familiar with UDL from just being in the world of education. That's really, really exciting. So tell me a little bit, obviously, Games for Change was this week. So tell me a little bit about what you were sharing with the folks there or what that project looked like.
Yeah, totally. So, Games for Change, this was a really full circle moment for me. I attended my very first Games for Change festival in 2019. If those listening haven't attended before, I very highly recommend it. It absolutely changed how I looked at games and how they might help people learn, but also live better lives. And what I was presenting on at Games for Change was this pilot that we conducted at SNU these past few years, all about this educational virtual reality app that our team designed called Synapse VR. Now, what Synapse VR is a educational VR app very specifically designed to align to SNU course outcomes, specifically in our biopsychology course. And what we were really curious about with these two pilots that I mentioned was what is the feasibility of implementing virtual reality as a teaching and learning tool across different learning modalities. Southern New Hampshire University, SNU, we serve over 170,000 learners distributed throughout the world, and this includes learners in many different contexts. We have an online division as well as a campus located in Manchester, New Hampshire. So what we wanted to do was connect this virtual reality app within our learning ecosystem. So we have a biopsychology course that runs on campus, as well as a biopsychology course that runs online. And we wanted to understand how could virtual reality support our online students as well as our in-place students.
Well, that is a lot you got going on there. So tell me maybe a little bit about the actual app itself that they're using. So what are they, when they put on their goggles, what are they seeing and what are they learning?
Sure. So Synapse VR consists of 3 separate modules, all connected to the course outcomes I mentioned. So the first experience is very much about the anatomical structures, immersing learners in the world of the brain to understand the process of neural transmission. And then the second experience is all focused on the experience of neural conduction. And transmission and conduction all together have to do with how neurons, brain cells, communicate with each other. The third experience brings everything together and connects brain and behavior to immerse the learner in this experience of a person, we call him David, who's recounting this traumatic event that happened to him. It's a forest fire, and what he experienced at the time. And at different places in the skybox, the surrounding view that the learner is immersed in, they can see the different things happening to David inside of him. So thinking about what's his brain doing, physiologically, what's happening to his heart rate, for example. So those 3 experiences together paint a picture of biopsychological processes. And really the goal here, the problem to solve, was thinking about these really abstract processes that learners can read about in a textbook and they can see in a video, and trying to make them come to life in a bit more of a concrete way, thinking about what virtual reality can be best used for. This is really an example of those field trips to the impossible that we hear VR called, where we get the learner inside that world of the brain, or able to show what's happening at various levels in real time along with the story being told.
I love it. It sounds like we're on the Magic School Bus. We've got Miss Frizzle with us, and we are going into that brain.
Exactly. And that's what one of our learners actually ended up saying in their feedback, which delighted us.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So what does it look like? I mean, you're the director of learning science, so you're not an app developer, right? But so what does that process look like of bringing something like this to life?
Yeah, I'm so happy you asked that question, because that's a really interesting part of that project. We were an interdisciplinary team, so I brought my learning science and instructional design background, but we also had a social psychologist on the team. We had a measurement and evaluation expert, someone with a background in game design, someone who was responsible for the user experience testing, and a data scientist. We partnered with our campus faculty member who teaches one of the biopsychology course sections, as well as Nuco, and that's a global production studio based in the UK who spearheaded that development work as we were working on the learning experience design. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me, having designed courses for an online learning environment, thinking about how do you blueprint a learning experience for an LMS versus how do you think about virtual reality as this learning canvas. And we learned so much along the way in terms of how do you create design docs to collaborate on what the virtual reality experience is going to be, what specifications do you need to think about how do you communicate with each other? Because, we are an interdisciplinary mix. We bring different lenses, which is so important. And that produces really fruitful conversations, but making sure we're all, thinking from the same ground definitions and same vision and achieving that shared vision. So that was a really interesting piece of it. And the interdisciplinary mix of our team produced some really cool debates about the vision of this, as I alluded to. Like, how much on rails should this experience be? Is this something where we want the learner to sit back and be toured through the world of the brain? Or, as we ended up going for, do we want something with some elements of challenge and dig into those learning mechanics afforded by immersive technology, where we can play a bit with elements of productive struggle and think about how do we really get learners to have to go through that trial and error to see, like, I know that neurotransmitters have to be synthesized and that will impact the next step in neural transmission. So what do I need to do in order to set the right pace? And so very intentionally in that experience, we've baked in those moments where they have to set rates and spin dials and move different elements and think about what's missing here and go back and forth. And it's not on rails. It's not something that can be sped through, but we really wanted to create that experience where you have to be mindful about that experience and just take the time to go through it, use those 6 degrees of freedom, and just solve those challenges thoughtfully.
That sounds great. So, as a Games for Change Festival veteran and pro at this point, either this year or last year, is there anything that you saw there and learned that really stood out to you?
Absolutely. So much. I'm thinking through now from the ones in the past where we learned about games for social impact, thinking about ways that games can build community. That's something I'm really interested in right now, is how do we use elements of games in learning experience to build community and build a sense of belonging. So that's something I'm absolutely interested in. Also, games and accessibility is really interesting to me and really important. I remember there was one session the first year I went by the Able Gamers charity, and it was absolutely eye-opening, and I appreciated what I learned from that, and I continue to go back to that as a resource.
Yeah, I've loved to see the development over time that has happened around accessibility. I think it is so vital to not just the work that we do within education, but just in the world at large, right? That we're thinking about all the people who might come and interact with whatever experience we're building. I always go back to that. It's not a Far Side comic, but it's like a single pane comic, right? Where it has the person is shoveling the stairs and there's the ramp next to it, right? It says, why aren't you shoveling the ramp first? It says, well, more people use the stairs. And it's like, well, everybody can use the ramp, right? So
Yeah.
love that one. And every time we go into those conversations around accessibility, I think it's one of those things where, like when Microsoft did the immersive reader just a year or two ago, it was, yes, it's great because it helps us reach all these other students who are struggling with, text on a page and need all these different accommodations to help them be able to read and process. But it's also great for anybody who wants to use it, right? So love that side of accessibility as well.
Totally. With you 100%.
So if people want to be able to either catch up with you in your work or other things that you've seen in the space that are really exciting, where can they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to get in touch with me and follow what I'm up to would be to connect with me on LinkedIn. You just search for Kat Flynn and I'll turn up, I think. And then I'm so inspired by the great thought leadership that's out there in the immersive learning space. So I was really influenced by Experience on Demand by Jeremy Bailenson. That's one of the first books I read when I found out I was going to contribute to a virtual reality project. And I actually heard about the book when I attended Games for Change. Another great resource has been the Immersive Learning Research Network. I had the fortune to attend that conference in a previous year and was able to connect with some wonderful researchers doing great work in that space. I also love the scholarship of Rich Mayer, Jocelyn Perrong, and Guido Mokransky. Such wonderful work coming out because there's a lot we're learning as we continue to dig deep into immersive technology and the affordances for the classroom. And it's a really exciting time to be in this space. I'd also be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my former colleague, Jesse Damiani, who does a lot of cool stuff on new media, immersive technology included, who's a great person to follow on Twitter.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today, for sharing some of your story and experience with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can be notified whenever we post new content. Looking forward to seeing you next time.